expected to be there is expected to be opposition to that raised in the council today. Traditionally, China is not fond of this. They are not a signatory to the Rome Statute that created the International Criminal Court. The common argument that they usually give is that this is an internal matter and not something that we think the Security Council should be involved in. As this Western diplomat said to me this morning, it's kind of hard to make that argument that this is an internal matter that doesn't require Security Council action when you have the Libyan ambassador himself making an appeal to the Security Council in tears to help stop the bloodshed there. So there are some issues that need to be worked out. But the diplomats I've spoken to are very confident that they will get something passed today. And if they have to fudge the wording a little bit on the ICC referral to appease everyone in the council, that may happen, but they really want to get something passed today.
OK, Kristen, thanks very much indeed for that update. Kristen Salumi at the United Nations in New York there. Well, let's just recap the main developments of our top story, the unrest in Libya. A funeral for one of the protesters reportedly killed by pro-Gaddafi forces in Tripoli on Friday has turned into a march by hundreds. Residents of the capital say the regime is arming civilian supporters who are setting up checkpoints and patrols around the city to quash dissent. Let's speak to Tarek Youssef, Senior Research Fellow at the Dubai School of Government, who's been with us throughout the day and joins us now. This defiant speech by Gaddafi that we heard Friday night, he talks about opening up weapons caches for his supporters. The fear is that we're fast approaching a scenario where he is going to make a last desperate stand to protect Tripoli.
Absolutely. I think we all fear that scenario. We're all still hoping that the country will avoid that scenario, because at that moment it will be very difficult to distinguish civilians from paramilitary, mercenaries, from security forces. And to the extent that you have other parts of the country involved in this, you could sow the seeds of great trouble. Libyans, and I think the international community as well, should be very aware of the possibility and should not discount this as a real possibility that Gaddafi, in a last desperate stand, might want to essentially destroy everything behind him.
But presumably those people who are still sticking with him are aware of this and are now desperately casting around for some alternative, or are they? Presumably they don't want a last-ditch scenario that you've just described.
That's right. At some point, people will decide where they want to be, on which side of the change in Libya they choose to be. Many of these people stand to lose, and lose a lot, from the privilege that has come with their association, proximity, and intimate deployment by the Gaddafi regime in the last 42 years. They have a lot to lose. They have an incentive to be equally defiant. But at some point, should they also decide that this regime is on its way out, they would not want to face the consequences that would come the day after he leaves. Hence the role of the international community as well in sending that message to some of the core people around Gaddafi that there will be consequences, there will be retribution, there might be referrals to the ICC.
Yeah, this is what they're talking about, possible prosecutions. What about the other issues they're talking about at an international level, for example, targeted sanctions and travel bans and asset freezes? Will that have any impact on the ground in Libya?
Not at the moment, but psychologically, I think it sends the message that the Libyan regime under Colonel Gaddafi is increasingly becoming a rogue regime. Once again, a pariah regime once again. If you can't travel, if you can't access your funds, if this regime cannot deploy the vast financial resources it has, even post-Gaddafi, many members around Gaddafi will have absolutely no future. And that, in my mind, is what would trigger their early preemptive decision to join the forces of change and to save the country the bloodshed that Gaddafi might very well be planning at this moment as a last-ditch effort to send his defiance into history.
Tarek, as ever, pleasure to speak with you. Thank you very much indeed, Tarek Youssef there. Well, some news from the rest of the region now. Yemen's president has suffered a setback, with several powerful tribal chiefs announcing their support for the anti-government movement. They include leaders from President Saleh's own Hashid tribe, which is considered the country's most powerful. Its members hold several key government positions. Protests demanding that Saleh resign have continued on Saturday in the capital, Sana'a. Well, let's get more from our correspondent there, Hashim Al-Habra.
The resignation of Hussein Abdullah Al-Ahmar is quite significant because he comes from the Hashid tribe, which is one of the most powerful tribes in northern part of Yemen. President Saleh is a Hashid himself. The Al-Ahmar family is the traditional leadership of Hashid. The brother of Hussein Al-Ahmar, Sadiq, is the leader of Hashid. One of his other brothers, Himyar, is the deputy speaker of parliament, and Hamid Al-Ahmar is a powerful opposition leader. Besides the huge political influence, they also run vast businesses here in the country and abroad. They were also joined by some tribal leaders from the other powerful tribe, which is Bakir, and this is going to further alienate or sideline President Ali Abdullah Saleh, who has been historically banking on Hashid and Bakir to remain in power. On the ground, situation remains very delicate in Aden, where 5 people were killed in clashes between the secessionists and pro-democracy protesters and security forces. The government is saying while it is ready to talk to the pro-democracy activists, it considers the secessionists an illegitimate entity in Yemen. Here in the capital, Sana'a, thousands of students are still camping outside the University of Sana'a, saying that they won't go home until President Saleh and the political elite in Yemen go.
A prominent leader from Bahrain's Shia opposition has arrived home from exile. In his absence, Hassan Mosheima was being tried for allegedly plotting a coup. But according to Bahrain's foreign minister, he's now been given a royal pardon. Meanwhile, several government ministers in Bahrain say they've been sacked. The concessions are aimed at placating the country's Shia majority. And in Algeria, hundreds of protesters are rallying again, demanding the resignation of President Abdelaziz Bouteflika. The protest comes 2 days after the government ended a 19-year state of emergency. But Algeria's interior minister says demonstrations are still banned in the capital, Algiers. Now, Egypt's ruling military council has apologized after military police beat protesters during overnight demonstrations in Cairo. The council said the violence was the result of unintentional confrontations between the military police and the youth of the revolution. It stressed it did not and would not issue orders to attack protesters. It's also ordered the immediate release of all those arrested on Friday night. Thousands of Egyptians demonstrated in Tahrir Square after Friday prayers. They want reforms to be enacted faster and ministers linked to the Mubarak regime to go. Well, Egypt's Constitutional Amendment Committee has also been meeting on Saturday. Our correspondent Anita McNaught is live for us in Cairo. Anita, what's it been saying?
Well, they've just had their press conference where they announced the proposed changes. And I have to stress these are proposals for changes to the Constitution. They're not necessarily the ones that the Egyptian people will end up with. But if approved by the military, they will, in a couple of months, this is the agreement thus far, go to a national referendum. Now, some of these details began to leak 3 days ago in the Egyptian press. And it seems at least one of them, which deals with the minutiae of who can be president and how long for, is indeed one of the concrete proposals made by this committee. This affecting the situation that allowed a Mubarak to develop and in theory prevents that ever happening again. So we have 4-year terms instead of 6-year terms and a limit of only 2 terms for any one president and a presidential position where he cannot or she cannot then nominate themselves for re-election in perpetuity, those sorts of guarantees. And in fact, if we stick with that theme really of reining in the powers that became centralized on the president's office, I think what characterizes the reforms that we're seeing coming out of these proposals from the committee is a pulling back of those powers that have been gradually accrued to the president by actions taken by Hosni Mubarak over the last few years. For example, the presidential committee that used to have almost complete control of who got selected to run for president and and mysteriously came back with only one man or a very limited selection time and time again. That's going now. So the selection of president will be much, much more open. Similarly, the judicial committees that did once exist to check on how free and fair elections were in Egypt, but were suspended by recent changes to the constitution under Hosni Mubarak, that has been changed. So the judicial supervision that ensured that back a few elections ago, Egyptian elections were a lot better than the last one is considered to be, there will be a return to that. There's also been some news on the emergency law. Of course, when you talk about satisfying protesters, they want to see those emergency laws, those draconian emergency laws that have been used to crack down on people so severely in the past. They want to see them lifted right away. Well, that doesn't seem to be happening just yet, but there are proposals to go ahead to the statutes, the articles in the Constitution that allow emergency law to be enacted to make it much, much harder to impose this on the Egyptian people in the future. So things like this coming through, which...
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I was going to say, it sounds like it's still an extremely long, drawn-out process, and that of course, is what many Egyptian people feel, that it's just taking far too long, hence the protests we saw on Friday.
Oh, indeed. But I think every Egyptian, and certainly this was corroborated by the people I spoke to yesterday in Tahrir Square, understand that changing a constitution is not a simple and easy matter, and that if it's a job that's rushed, it could be a job that's done badly. And Egypt has suffered from a badly written and badly amended constitution in the past, and this is the first real chance the people have had for years to get it right, and they want to get it right. But you're absolutely correct, Shuli. People said to us, on the one hand, it's taking too long, the public nerve won't survive this, and other people were saying to us, the process is being rushed, we can't possibly get a good government out of this. And what the other protesters have said to us, we've called a few after these announcements came out from the committee, is that these sorts of changes are ones that are obvious. They should have been made years ago. So they're unsurprised that these are the proposals coming out of the committee, and right now they're far more concerned that the temporary cabinet governing the country seems to be full of appointees who look pretty much like the old people who ran the country, and they're far more concerned that there is essentially, at the fundamentals of it, no change in how Egypt is being governed, and they're not confident with the government as currently structured.
Anita, thanks very much indeed for that update. Anita McNaught in Cairo there. Well, let's get more now on Libya's uprising. The Italian Prime Minister, Silvio Berlusconi, says Muammar Gaddafi appears to no longer control the country. Let's go to Lauren Taylor, who's in London, for more on that. Lauren.
Yes, Julie, Berlusconi said the events of the past few weeks affect trade relations, energy supplies and Italy's security. Well, Italy still has close business ties with its former colony, and now details are emerging in newspaper reports of major deals between Libya and Italian defence companies. Well, they quote an official report from the Italian